What's up, everyone? Late last night, I finished Mr. Mercedes, the first book in the Bill Hodges trilogy by Stephen King. And while I'm not usually someone who reads thrillers, crime thrillers, by now you guys can guess I'm a Stephen King fan. So I was a little excited for this because I've found that it seems as though every Stephen King novel I've read, I've enjoyed to one extent or another, Some I enjoy way more, and some, less, but it seems as though every Stephen King novel I've read, at least so far, has been a hit for me. And I am happy to say that Mr. Mercedes keeps that ball rolling. So, what's Mr. Mercedes about if you've never heard about this? Well, let me just give you like a quick summary. Mr. Mercedes takes place someplace in Midwest America in an unnamed city. I don't even think this city actually exists. And it follows Bill Hodges, former detective for this city, and he was this decorated officer, and he's attempting to track down and find the man responsible for a mass killing at the hands of a gray Mercedes. He drove it into a crowd, and the crime has gone unsolved, and nothing's been heard about this killer, and then this killer starts tormenting Bill Hodges, the detective, and planning another mass killing. So this is very much a crime thriller detective story, and this is not normally the kind of stuff I read, as you guys can probably guess. I read a lot of fantastical stories. I read fantasy, science fiction. I've started getting into horror, but I wanted to switch it up. I like to try and expand my horizons, and I figured it would be a pretty safe bet with King because I've really enjoyed all of his books so far, and he's becoming very rapidly one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author out there. So, I decided to give this a try. I took a loan out from my local library, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this. Now, I'm going to say things about this book that I haven't said about other Stephen King books, both positives and negatives, and I'll start with the negatives. Traditionally, the Stephen King characters are kind of a really big reason why I enjoy his stories. I spoke about in my, the Stand review, and, even in The Gunslinger and The Drawing of Three, how great I think Stephen King is at just capturing characters and just bringing characters to life. And not to say that that doesn't occur here, but I don't think the characters are ones that I was deeply invested in as I have been with other Stephen King characters. And that's not to say that these characters are boring or not three-dimensional. They are, but that wasn't really what kept me going throughout this book. I enjoy Bill Hodges and his kind of hodgepodge crew that he gathers together. I think they're a fun group of characters to follow, but they're by no means Stephen King's best. What I will say, on the other hand, is that what Stephen King does here, and does positively, is keep you engaged. Because from the second this thing opens up, this dude gives you something to chew on. There is just, and I've said this before about Stephen King and his books, this man knows how to write atmosphere. This man knows how to give you a sense of dread and anxiety like no other author I've read. And I mean that genuinely. The scene, and this is not like a huge spoiler, opens up when this very gray and cloudy morning, it's raining, there's a bunch of people who lost their jobs due to the recession, because this was written back in 2009, at this job fair, and they're waiting for the doors to open up, and it's miserable, and there's a kid in the crowd, and it's crying, and it's poor mothers and fathers who are just trying to do it right by their family. And the fog's rolling in because it's a gray Midwest morning. It felt very Ohio style to me, like maybe Cincinnati or something like that, And then these lights come on, and this Mercedes comes out and kills everyone. And that's just how King does it, you know what I mean? He gives you this atmosphere of suspense and dread and misery and all these things, and then he hits you with it. And from that moment on, this book keeps rolling. This book keeps rolling with the atmosphere. And I feel like, something, even though I really like Stephen King, and you guys can probably guess that by now, is that his books are traditionally fairly slow-paced, I would say. The Stand is not a thriller. I think his best-paced books that I've read so far have been the Dark Tower series. They have been, nonstop action. But besides that, his horror books and his longer books tend to be slower paced because he tries to build things up and build suspense and make you care about characters. But this one I feel like was excellently paced. It was fast paced. I felt like there was always something to look at and think about. And the way that he just wrote this, and it's a fairly short book. It's 14 hours on audio, so it's not very long, at least by my standards, was just so well done. Because he kept throwing me things that I just thought, oh man, like there was just such a sense of dread in my chest throughout this entire book that it's kind of hard to explain. Like you just have to read it, because even though I wouldn't say I was terribly invested in the characters, he still made me fear for them. So King is doing this weird balancing act where he's not necessarily giving you characters over, hundreds if not thousands of pages that you're going to just fall in love with. But what he is doing is putting these characters in scenarios that make you want to jump in the page and shake them and be like, no, you're being misled. This is not what the killer is doing. This is what the killer is doing. And the way that it all builds and comes to a head at the end, I thought was so well done. I think this is a really good book. Genuinely, I think it's by no means my favorite Stephen King book, but I think it's a great, grounded, gritty story, and that's not what I'm used to with reading King. I like his horror and his fantasy is very horror and fantasy. It's very fantastical. First book I ever read by him had vampires in it. Second book I ever read had Pennywise in it. You know what I mean? But when he wants to, King can write this incredibly grounded narrative that is completely, it's completely believable in the real world circumstances that we live in. So yeah, I thought the way he built suspense was incredible. I thought the pacing was really good. I did enjoy the characters. They're not my favorite by any means, but I thought they were enjoyable. I thought that the attempts at humor with one of the characters was a huge miss for me. Maybe I'm sensitive, but the way he was using certain language I thought was weird. King just has certain mannerisms about the way he writes, and if you've read his books, you know what I'm talking about. And that was just a miss for me. The humor was just a miss. But besides that, overall, pretty great book. Good characters, very suspenseful. I thought the prose was exactly what it needed to be. I thought it was narrated well by the guy who did it. And I thought the way it wrapped up in this really climactic moment of do or die was just incredibly well executed, just very well done. It's a good crime thriller, and I've not read a lot of crime thrillers, so maybe my bar is low, but I enjoyed it. So I'm gonna give it an 8.3 out of 10, and I look forward to eventually reading the rest of this trilogy.